Also, I have never put this necklace on the correct way, like the first time. So let's see if this happens. I'm capable of fastening every necklace except for this one. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. There. That's all. Just a cute little necklace. Jeez. Hey y'all, I'm Cece, and today I am here to talk about all of the books that I've read recently. I think at this point it's pretty apparent that the state of the world has changed how I focus. I'm not gonna call it like a worse focus or anything like that because I'm trying to be less hard on myself, but it's become a little bit more difficult for me to take in new information, you know? It's like a couple of years ago, my brain was like 50% full with the stuff that's going on all the time, so I could constantly pour new information in there. I could be like, look, here's all these movies, and these TV shows, and these books, and these comics, and these podcasts. But at this point, it feels like because of how much is going on all the time and how bad it is, my brain is like 99% full, and every now and then, like a teensy tiny bit goes away. And I can pour a little bit of new stuff in. And that's when I'm like, quick, a book! So this is not a monthly wrap-up because that would be somewhat pointless. I have 5 books to talk about, and they're all books that I've read within the previous, 4 months or so. I'll tell you a bit more about them as I go from book to book. I rated all 5 of these relatively close together, so I'm going to talk about the books in the order that I read them, so I can give you a little bit of context as to when I read them and why. But before we get into my reviews, I wanted to thank this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creative and curious people to learn and grow, whether that's through classes in illustration, photography, productivity, freelancing, or a ridiculous number of other things. Skillshare has ways for you to learn, and you can learn and grow at your own pace. Today I wanted to recommend a Skillshare class called Productivity Today by Kevin Siskar. This is an eternal struggle for me, the concept of productivity and how I define productivity for myself. I appreciated that this class was really practical in dealing with the fact that you have to address what's distracting you before you can create a pattern that breaks you free from that. Skillshare Premium membership, it gives you unlimited access to all of the classes on the platform, and an annual membership works out to be less than $10 a month. Also, the first 1,000 of my subscribers who click the link in my description are going to get a free trial of that premium membership so you can explore your own creativity. Definitely check that out. Support Skillshare. I would love if you clicked on that link. It would mean a lot to me. It would mean a lot to Skillshare. So thank you so much again to them for sponsoring this video. Now, let's talk about the books that I've read recently, in quotations. This is gonna be the real kicker. First I have to talk about a book that I read in 2020 that I haven't reviewed yet. I kind of reviewed it. I reviewed it in my 2020 releases ranked and reviewed video, but I never talked about it in a wrap-up because I haven't done a wrap-up since mid-November? Earlier than that, maybe? Let's see, when was the last time I did a wrap-up of any kind? 5 months ago. Is that accurate, YouTube? October 30th, 2020. So, a book that I finished mid-November, didn't get a chance to read it, and I did not complete another book for the remainder of 2020. This is the last thing I read last year. We have Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno-Garcia. Like I said, I talked about this in my 2020 ranked and reviewed video. I read this, or I started reading this specifically because this was released right around the same time that The Haunting of Bly Manor was released, and after I watched that and obviously became fully obsessed with it in every conceivable way, I really wanted more Gothic horror. What was more perfect than this brand new release? So Mexican Gothic is a Gothic horror novel set in Mexico in the 1950s. I'm not sure what year exactly. And it follows a socialite named Noemi from Mexico City. She gets this really frantic letter from her cousin who is just recently married, this English guy, and Noemi rushes to her cousin's side. And once she gets to this mansion out in the middle of nowhere, she immediately feels like something creepy as hell is going on. So Noemi resolves to stay at the mansion, try to comfort her cousin, who mentioned that she was somewhat ill and is now kind of going back on that. She's also trying to figure out what's going on. This is definitely a slow burn, which I know is not going to work for a lot of people because for the most of this, not a lot happens. And beyond that, it is Gothic horror. And I think something that's really important to remember about Gothic horror is that it's not like spooky scary. It's not supposed to be like a jump scare. Gothic horror tends to focus on ghosts that are also emotions. Like this concept of you're not just haunted by the dead, you're haunted by past versions of yourself, you're haunted by emotion, grief, decisions you've made. That is such a central part of Gothic horror, is tackling horror as it deals with emotions and as it deals with like particular people. Also, Gothic horror is super atmospheric, and I feel that in both of these cases, Mexican Gothic completely nailed it. It is atmospherically spot on. It's a perfect slow burn where you just know something is off, but you're not sure what, and that creeping unease is perfection. My only thing with this book, the issue that I had with it, is that while it is a slow burn, and I liked that, the end takes a real ramp off into the extreme, which is not inherently a problem. I just think that maybe it could have been extended into a little bit more of the book, because by the time you get into the final act, all the big shit happening, you're like, oh, whoa, we have not been going this pace for like a couple hundred pages. This does also get super fucked up, I'm going to warn you. I am going to leave trigger warnings for all of the books that I talk about down in the description below, so if you want to go check that out, you can peruse. I would definitely recommend it for this book. There are some just absurd trigger warnings that I think most people don't think to worry about when they pick up a book, so read it over. I'm really glad I read this when I did. Last November, I read The Haunting of Hill House after like watching that show obsessively, and creating this November atmosphere of Gothic horror and emotions and ghosts is just like, it's a very big thing for me. So this hit at exactly the right time. Ultimately, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The ending, like I said, is just kind of like the mix between tones and pace just gives you a little bit of whiplash. But I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to read Sylvia Moreno's other work. I'm mostly excited to read Gods of Jade and Shadow. That was on my top 10 to read of this year. And I want to read a bunch of her other books. So 4 out of 5 stars. Last book I read in 2020. We've covered it. Okay, the next book that I'm going to talk about is a book that I finished like January 1st. I had this huge burst of motivation, and I was like, okay, it's 2021. I am going to make my motivation to read come back. So I'm going to finish a book the first day, and that's going to carry me through for the rest of 2021. That's literally never worked in my life. I have made that promise to myself so many times, and it's ridiculous. Learning to trust your brain's pace is the most freeing thing that you can do. If you don't want to read right now, and you don't have to read right now, don't do it. It's okay. If you are reading as a hobby, then you do not need to read all the time if you're not feeling it. Don't compare yourself to others. Just monitor how much information the teacup in your brain has, and if you can't put more information into it without it spilling over, it's okay to not read the book. Having said that, January 1st, I was like, I got this. I'm gonna motivate myself. I'm gonna read a whole book. It's gonna be great. And I did! I read Come Tumbling Down by Seanan McGuire, which is the 5th book? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. This is the 5th book in the Wayward children's series, which is one of my ultimate faves. I think if you've been viewing this channel for any amount of time, you probably know that. So, Wayward children's series. The first book is Every Heart a Doorway. It is about a magical school for kids who have gone through portals to other worlds, and in those other worlds they found like a true home, and then they were dumped back into our world, and they just feel completely out of place. So they all go and live at Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children. I love that. I love this book and I love the whole series, but one of the most important things to know about the series is that the books trade off. So odd-numbered books are all books set at Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children, or they are books about quests. So books following a large group of kids. Whereas even-numbered books are character backstories. It's where you're learning more about the people who are in Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children. So those characters you meet in the first book, you get to start to explore how they got there. You get to learn more about the world that they lived in before they got to Eleanor West's. I'm telling you all of this so that I can clarify that I vastly prefer the character-driven backstory books to the quest-related, like, school-centric books. And while this did lull me into enjoyment because it featured one of my favorite characters in this whole series, I still just can't vibe with the group dynamic as much. It's not that I don't like all of the side characters, it's just that I don't know them as well, and I don't know that the way that they all interact works as well as when Seanan is writing about some weird fantasy world that the characters had to deal with, and how that relates to trauma, because this is a series it's a portal fantasy series about trauma, so I'm always more interested in, like, the character-specific stuff. Like I said, this follows one of my fave characters. She is a pansexual girl with OCD, and an FF romance is a part of her and the series. And she's also this, like, mad scientist, fabulous, I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed. So I liked this more than I think I liked the last quest book. What was the last quest book? Beneath the Sugar Sky. This was book 3, and it was just too light for me. I couldn't get into it. Come Tumbling Down was better, but it still had a bunch of side characters and side plot lines that I didn't care about as much. Maybe I'll care about them more once I learn more about those characters. So I gave Come Tumbling Down 4 out of 5 stars, which is still a very good rating. I would still say it's my second to least favorite of the series. Not in a bad way, because it's still a good book, but I like the first book the best of the school-centered books. But my 2 ultimate faves in the series are In an Absent Dream and Down Among the Sticks and Bones. Like, these are just incredible, incredible books. And so, as much as I enjoy a good quest story, it can't compare in my brain to these. 4 out of 5 stars. Good. A great way to start the year. It did not magically fix my brain so that I had to read all the time again, shockingly. You know, might have been a lot of pressure to put on that book. Anyway, then we went through an extended reprieve from reading. Mid-February is when I really focused in, and I was like, okay, we're gonna try this again. And I started reading The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta, and I still couldn't focus on stuff, so I set this aside. I will be talking about this again in a minute, but I tried. My brain said no. And then we reach March, and I read 2 books in 2 days. Would you look at that? So, Fireborne and Flamefall by Rosaria Munda are the first and second books in the Aurelian cycle, which is a YA fantasy expected trilogy. The third book isn't out yet. Flamefall literally just came out in March. And I did a sponsored reading vlog for these books. That vlog is completely spoiler-free, and actually I'm really proud of it. I think that I am able to really get into some details of why I liked these books as much as I did without spoiling anything. Plus, there's a ridiculous amount of cat footage. So if you're curious to hear more about these books, if you're curious to see my cat, and you're curious to see me crying on camera, check out that vlog where I read these books. So, Fireborne, the first book in the series, it follows Annie and Lee. Annie's full name is actually Antigone, but for the most part she goes by Annie in the book. And Annie and Lee were raised together as orphans. The society used to be run by aristocrats, and they have access to dragons. Basically, the system was only aristocrats get dragons, and there was a very, very severe caste system, and during the uprising against that regime, both Annie and Lee's families died in very different circumstances, but they wound up together at the same orphanage and have been friends for their entire lives after that, but now they are competing for the same coveted role in the new regime. But wait, let me get into it. Let me tell you like the meat of this book. Why you want to read this political dragon romance angsty fantasy. So here's the thing. Annie's parents were killed by the previous Dragon Lord, the guy who was in charge of everything. He killed her family, and he made her watch. Lee's father was the Dragon Lord, the guy I was just talking about, and he witnessed his entire family being murdered during the uprising, and the new ruling class came in and they murdered Lee's family. Now, if you're like, wait, Cece, it's really fucked up that Annie wouldn't know that about Lee if you're talking about a potential romance. I see what you mean. But the thing is, this book is a genius. Rosaria Munda is a genius. And Annie is basically aware the entire time of Lee's backstory, and that's like a huge part of what she's reckoning with. Responsibilities of war and how children carry on the responsibilities of their parents, and whether children are in any way responsible for the actions of their parents. So like, whatever you're thinking about some big dramatic reveal, I'm sure exactly what I was thinking. Almost immediately in this book, Annie makes it clear that she knows who Lee is, and she's worked through that, and she's going to keep working through that with you so you understand it. Lee and Annie are incredible, they're angsty, and they understand each other so well. The thing that I talked about with this book in my vlog, like obsessively, was that despite how horrible the decisions are in this book, despite how many horrific things have to happen and no-win situations arise, every character in this book, like, they love each other so deeply and they understand each other so that even when they're fighting, they have moments where they can pause in their fighting because they can comfort whoever they're fighting with, and maybe they're the only one who knows how. And like, the tenderness of that knocked me on my ass constantly. So obviously, like I said, this book is about Annie and Lee competing for the same role. They're kind of competing for the lead security position, I guess, in the entire kingdom, the lead dragon rider. And so that's a huge part of it. Like, all of these kids are competing for this huge position, but they've also all known each other and been in training for their entire lives together. So one of these books literally has like a I'm gonna break down. There's legitimately like a platonic scene where characters fully clothed climb in a bath together so that one of them can calm down from a panic attack. And it's in the middle of like a huge argument. Genuinely, that's the greatest. Like, as it was happening, I could not believe it. It was one of the best scenes I've ever read in a YA book. So, if you like angry women and no-win situations and dragons and also guys with a very, very rigid morality who love the people around them and want nothing more than to be better than the generation before them, I have a series for you. So I rated Fireborne, the first book in the series, 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I wound up rating Flamefall 4 out of 5 stars, just a little bit lower. I felt like I got more emotional in this book, but I always have a hard time with second books, and I think that that's a very common theme. Mostly I'm just curious how the series is going to wrap up at this point, but an important thing to note is that Flamefall introduces a new central main character named Griff, who is queer, and there is a potential male-male romance involved. I haven't even gotten into half of what I need to talk about with these books, like the fact that this entire society is inspired by Plato's Republic, or the fact that the Aurelian cycle refers to this epic poem in the Flamefall universe that's comparable to, like, the Aeneid. There's the fact that this features magic schooling and training on dragons, and people who love each other so much being forced into opposite sides of a scenario. And even when there are love triangles or love quadrangles or whatever, no one hates each other. They're all just like, God, isn't this a shitty situation we're in? All we can do right now is love each other and we'll make it through. Please, please read Fireborne and Flamefall. Check out my non-spoilery vlog if you want to hear more. I had so much fun reading these, and I'm so glad that Penguin gave me the chance to do, like, a whole reading vlog around these, because I'd been putting off reading more YA fantasy, and I had so much fun reading these. And the last book that I have, the 5th book, is The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. Like I said, we'd get back around to it. So I finished this near the beginning of April. I picked it back up after I recovered from my 2-day binge of the Aurelian cycle. I finally recovered and I picked this back up, read the second half, and absolutely loved it. I think the biggest thing that I can emphasize for you about The Black Flamingo is how much I have written all over this copy of this book. And I'm sure some people are going to be like, what do you mean? But honestly, at this point, I write in most books. The thing is, I went to college for 4 years to get an English degree, and that means that I'm very used to annotating everything I read and constantly writing my thoughts down in the margins and marking things so I can remember them later for essays. And I'm not going to break that habit. I like writing in my books because I like going back through later and rereading my faves and being like, look at that thought that my younger self had about that book. It's such a cool snapshot into who I used to be, and how I interpret things differently. Like I said, I'm sure some people are like, what do you mean you wrote all over the book? But like, I wrote all over the book. Like, all... it's covered. There are highlighted passages. There are passages with like fucking arrows, like pointing at different things and pointing back at different parts of the book. I loved reading this because there were so many moments that made me stop and think and reflect on everything. My God, I haven't even told you what this book is about. The Black Flamingo is a YA novel in verse. This is about a kid named Michael who is biracial. He's Jamaican and Greek. Yeah, Jamaican and Greek. From what I understand, this is really, really inspired by Dean Atta's own life, growing up in London as a queer mixed-race kid. And this is also about Michael learning more about the drag world and possibly embracing a drag persona and what that expression means to him as, like, a queer teen of color. And I loved it. I thought it was so gorgeously written, and I have been reading so much more poetry over the last couple of years than I have in the past, which I've talked about. I think I talk about it every time I read poetry, but sometimes I reflect on people in my past who discouraged me from having certain interests by just being sort of dismissive of the things I was passionate about, and those things can follow you so much for so long, and so I think the reason that I talk about the fact that I'm into poetry now and why I'm excited that I'm so much more into poetry now is that it is part of pushing past, like, someone who cared about me making me feel bad for something that I liked. And it's not okay for people to do that to you, first of all, but it's just nice to look at it and reflect on the ways that I've grown, because I don't let other people define my happiness for me anymore, and I can embrace and read the things that I want to read that are going to bring me joy no matter what, without worrying about someone in my life, like, making me feel bad about it. And I think it was within that mindset that I was reading a lot of Michael's life and his experiences with the people that he knew, the subtle ways that this book brings up the fact that everyone equates being queer to sex is genius. Everyone does it except for the people in Michael's life that actually understand and actually connect to him. Every single person will always pivot to a question or a comment about sex as soon as Michael brings up anything related to being gay, even if he hasn't brought up sex at all. And that is so reflective of what happens constantly in every space. It's why homophobes will get so angry about queer people being in kids shows because they see queer people in kids shows and immediately say, well, we can't have sex on screen because that's what they see. And the way that this book got into the mindset of the people who were doing that to Michael and the people who weren't framing it that way, like, I was obsessed with. That was one of the things I was making notes on constantly, and it's gross and it's fucked up, but it is what happens constantly. And yeah, so that was like, again, one of the million themes that I was writing about and wanting to talk about. I love that this is a book about self-love and journeys of self-expression and finding a place in the world of drag, no matter what your persona is going to be, no matter what version of yourself you want to portray. There's a space in drag for you. There is a culture. There is a community. And I loved all of those things about this. This is just a genuinely beautiful story about queer identity and queer identity as it intersects with racial identity, with the fact that this is a character who lives in London, who is Jamaican, and how the other white people in London perceive Michael because of that. There were just so many aspects of queer culture and identity that this book dealt with so well, and I loved it. I wound up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I think that was possibly because of how, like, spread out the reading time was. I think if I dig back into this and reread it, which I am planning to do eventually, it would probably end up being a 5-star read. Although I was really frustrated with Michael's best friend, and I don't know that that plotline was fully resolved, so no, I think I'm gonna stick with that 4.5. Michael's best friend is the reason for my discomfort, but I think everything else about this book is incredibly well done, and if you're into novels in verse, I encourage you to read it. If you're not sure about novels in verse, this is still a super accessible read, and I think you can get into it. Okay, all, that's it. Those are the 5 books that I have read recently. If you have read any of these books, please let me know your thoughts about them down in the comments below. I would love to chat more about these, especially because I enjoyed all of them so much. Let me know how your reading schedule has been in 2021. Has the world as it exists right now cut into your reading time? Has it changed how you're able to focus? Are you reading more now? Because some people are reading more now, and I am amazed by you. You're doing great. If you're not reading more right now, you're doing great too. Like, same. But I would love to hear how your reading is being impacted right now. Let's talk about it together. Thank you, all of you, so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!